afternoon. My name is William Pegues. I'm a senior principal or senior associate principal with WDG Architecture in Washington, D.C. I'm the head of specifications and materials research. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about checklists as a process, not so much as how to create a checklist or what a checklist is, but turning a checklist into a scheduling tool, a milestone tool for a whole process of collecting information and communicating information between members of the design team and the construction documents team. So we start off with our standard thing for all AIA certified presentations that this is a registered provider, Craig Michaels. There's forms in the back of the room back there, I think on the far, to me, the left, you're the right side, to pick up and fill out. The course description is, the program will demonstrate how to create a specification checklist and use it to control the flow of information between project team members and diverse consultants. And just as important, how to use it as a milestone scheduling tool. Most specifiers, internal or independent, suffer the plight of a set of drawings appearing and being told a spec is needed in a certain amount of time, weeks, days, hours. During the session, we'll discuss the steps to create a checklist and how to maintain it, and explore how to bring the checklist into the timeline of a project and make it an effective scheduling tool for the standard milestones typical to all projects. We'll also cover how to create these milestones specific to any given office practice. This is something that you can do in any office, not just an architectural firm or an interiors firm or an engineering firm. My own office, our office is an interiors component and an architectural component. We don't have engineering, we use consultants for that. And we have had projects where we've been the project of record for a project architect of record for some very large projects, like for one of them is U.S. Coast Guard. And this checklist and the scheduling and milestone went out to all of our consultants, some of which numbered about, I think it came to about 15 that actually were providing documents. Some were just providing advice. Milestones were sent to everybody that was appropriate at the time. And the way that we do it is that we send it all through one person, the project architect for the project. That person is the person who needs to know everything. They're supposed to know everything about a project, everything that coordinates it. So I don't communicate separately, and I don't believe in communicating separately to consultants because it just gets out of cycle with things and people forget who said what to whom. So this whole checklist as a tool is something that everything goes through it, everything goes back and forth through the project architect out to everyone else. So it's a big funnel of information that one person can oversee it and transmit it to the different parties that need to know. So, creating a specifications checklist, maintaining it, using it, and milestones. Creating a checklist. We all tried to create checklists, and it's really a simple process. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on how to create a checklist. The easiest thing to do is you just start with a table of contents. It depends upon how you come into a firm. Maybe you come into a firm that has an existing system there already. Maybe you pick that up, adopt it. Maybe you scrap it and start all over, or maybe you're just something that's fitting in. But what you need to have is an understanding that we write sections. As specifiers, we're writing specification sections. And there's information you need to know on any given section. So what you can do is, as you are going through a table of contents with the project architect or your design team, whoever the members may be, you can start asking them questions. Well, you can also start writing those questions down because those are the things that are part of the checklist. You can then communicate that to them. As an example of that kind of thing, I have here just a couple of sections that are at the top of the Division 8 openings division. I'm going to use hollow metal doors and frames. So right now, this is just what the master table of contents looks like. I may not have all those sections. I might have all of them. Who knows? But there's nothing there. There's no question there. It's basically, do you have hollow metal doors and frames, or not? And so there's things that you need to know to complete this process, and it's the project architect who's going to know. It's like, I don't know whether we have exterior hollow metal doors, or whether they're only interior, or whether they're all exterior and none are interior. I don't know the scope of the project. I can't tell. If that drawing has arrived on my desk, somehow I may be able to figure it out, but maybe not. One of the things I like to say is that there's two processes, there's two columns on any checklist as to whose responsibilities are doing what. And on one side we have the project architect, who's sort of represented by the sun and the moon and the stars and all good things that come from everybody. And then we have over here on our side is like, there's this little thing that kind of grows in the dark. And mushrooms. And the process of information flow. And when I started doing this back in the early or the late 70s, the information kind of went like this. So in other words, everything gets dumped on the mushroom, and you ask a question and you never get an answer. That doesn't work very well. And firms that work like that is like usually the specification process to get to your final book is huge and has a lot of time-consuming things in it and a lot of holes in it. And you end up with addendum number 1 being half the size of your initial book. And that's not a good thing. So we want to avoid this. We want to avoid the whole thing of like, here's a roll of drawings, I need a book in 3 weeks. We can't live with that. When you're talking about BIM and how we do integrated modeling, it's all irrelevant as to where this information ends up. It's information, it has to be coalesced into something that becomes meaningful. So we start out, we talk to somebody and we say, hey, we have hollow metal doors and frames, and what kind of questions do I need to ask? Here's the questions that I ask, and they're not very many. Now, I have my own master specification. I don't use AI's master spec or anyone else's system. Our company's been around since the 30s, so they had a lot of history. So we have our own custom system. So these are the questions that I ask. Notice that there's a lot of information that's not here. I don't need to ask the project architect about whether they're galvanized frames or not. I know that if I have exterior doors, they're going to be galvanized. I need to know that there are exterior doors on the project because, well, what we do is we close the header off so that when the door opens up and it fills up with water in the top channel and the door closes, it doesn't drench my customers and owners. So I want to know that, and I want to know, okay, yeah, I do have galvanizing because that's a default. But the project architect doesn't need to know these background things. He doesn't have to. He only needs to be able to tell me some very basic things here. And do I have doors with louvers? Are there glazed openings? Are there double acting doors? Are there any knockdown type frames? Are these labeled or non-labeled openings? And provide manufacturer's cut sheets. That's very important. Now somebody thinks that, okay, for a hollow metal door like this, maybe I really don't use a cut sheet for myself, but I want to see what they're marking up. And also it really serves a good purpose as well. Part of the checklist process is that using these tools throughout the whole process of the project. What we do is that we take our cut sheets and they're passed to the person that's going to be doing CA. So he knows what was marked up and what process it went through. And if there's something that comes through as a submittal, well then he can compare the things. This is what we were trying to do and what the designer and the project architect's intent was when they marked this up and they circled up all of the options. And they you can now compare something. You're not going to necessarily get that specific item. And on very generic items like hollow metal doors and frames, it might not be as useful. But when somebody has done an overhead door, and is it a high-speed door or not? Or what options did it have? Did you have a walk-through side piece on it? Which angle was the motor? All of these things like this, like all of those options, all of those things that aren't part of it, crossed out, marked up, highlighted, however. Then that gets passed on to the CA people. So it's not just something like, okay, here, give me a cut sheet, I write a spec section for you. It's something that lasts over time, something that becomes part of the process. So what we do is that he has this, and he has this for all of the whole sections. Many, many, many topics. My checklist, I try to limit it. Because I don't want them to end up with too many things, but still it turns out to be basically about 50 pages long. I think it's like 54, something like that. But what I also do is that we have an interview. We have an interview process. Basically, I mark out a 2-hour period where when they're due to give it to me, they come with a set of drawings, we sit down together and we go over the project with the checklist. They hand it to me, I go down the questions and I say, well, here's some more work you need to do. This isn't quite enough information. Or what's this question mark mean? Because maybe they don't know yet how we're going to handle those. But I tell them, be brutal. I actually have instructions about some things as well. Some things are a little more detailed, like here's the elevator schedule. I actually have them complete an elevator schedule about what each group of elevators is doing. Like this is just like one group here, but this is duplicated as many times for as many elevator groups that they have. So that this is basically general information. And from this, there's more questions technically about what kind of security system is working with it as well. But this I understand how the elevators are operating. And so sometimes it's a long list and sometimes it's not. So maintaining the checklist is part of that is how you actually tell somebody you're going to use it. And this is the start. This is page 1 and the first of the 3 instructions of how to edit this and what we're going to use this for. So that this is the first thing that the project architect sees. And I want him to be bold and brutal with it. I don't want somebody to come back with a little, they've used a tiny little Sharpie with an edge on it that's like a knife and little comments written all over the side of it. And so it says, no, not used. No, if it's not used, you take a great big magic marker or whatever marker you're using and you cross it out. It makes it easy to see. And it makes it understandable for them as well, because you don't want to have to spend time with something that is, it's a tool, it's meant to be used, and then its life is expended. So don't just leave items that are blank or skip over them, because there's no way to differentiate with them. I don't know whether it's a skipped item or whether it's meant to be thought about later. If you either have a question mark by it, or you've crossed it out, or you've answered the questions. And we very strongly agree, and this is like the checklist works very well this way as well, is that you don't just leave a topic in, oh, yeah, we got, I'm sure we're going to end up with overhead doors and not overhead grills. I'm sure we will. I mean, I hear that kind of thing all the time. And it's every time I have to tell them, and you have to work the process. There's like, no, I have to agree with what's on your drawings right now 100%. I don't ever want to be out of phase with you. I want to walk lockstep with you. That might make me have to do more work, but I'm willing to do that because I want to be exactly what's on your drawings, because if you change anything on your drawings, it means you have to come tell me. You can never sit there in your mind and think, okay, I'm pretty sure I told him we're likely to have them, and well, we do. And then I was on the other side and I said, well, I don't think he has them, so I don't know. So no, I was like, if it's not on the drawings, it's there. Now, one of the other things too is that when they give this to me, when they sit down and hand me here's all the cut sheet packages, we're going to do the interview, they come with it marked up, and it's marked up in colored pencil. I said, or pens or whatever they're handy. I said, do not use black and white. Use colors. They give that to me as the original. They make a copy for themselves, all the cut sheets and the checklist. And that's because this is being handed out at a time when I'm getting it somewhere they're probably at about 50%. We're aiming to do a permit set or a review set at 75%. So I'm getting this checklist when they're at about the 50% marker. So there's going to be a lot of changes between when we get to where we produce the first review book about 4 weeks after, or about 3 weeks after we have this interview. So what they do with that is that they record, they've got a copy of it now. It's all black and white. And I say, now keep using your colored pens, because then it lets you find something quickly. If you mark something different between now and when I'm going out the door with it, then you know you need to come tell me, and you've been marking on it with a colored pen, we can find it easily. It'll show up. So it just creates habits. It's just a good thing to do, and it maintains the process. It maintains the checklist as a tool that's useful. So after that, then we're into the draft spec and the review, and then we really move away from the checklist at this point, except when you are going to the final and say a whole topic. We didn't have wood doors, now we do. The interior designers that the owner is working with separately, they come to us and they say, well, we want you to document the interior designer's drawings with your specifications. And so suddenly now there's a whole bunch of new topics. Well, they go back to the checklist, the black and white version, and mark it up in colors and give me those. And so we start the process over again for these other elements. And it's that checklist that has been building over the whole project. It's got all the other notes in it. He's looking at it and saying, tile, yeah, well, maybe we got to do something about underlayments, because we weren't really expecting this to be part of our project, and now it is, and so the floors aren't going to be too level. I don't know how you guys get concrete in your part of the world, but in mine it's really bad. So we have a thing about underlayments. So this makes it a really good living document. Also, maintaining a checklist is something different as well. There's like maintaining it over the life of the firm. Like, how do you add to it? It's okay, something new comes along, you just simply add it when it's convenient for you. You don't need to be, I guess you would say, you don't need to harass yourself. Do it when it's comforting. It's like, when is it easy to start to modify this document? Whenever it's comforting for you to do that. It's like, okay, I choose to do it because I'm bored with this task of having to write hardware for 6 hours. So I'm going to take a break, and I can add some notes to my checklist, my master checklist, or modify it because something came up. So I keep all of these ideas of what needs to be done to it on a little soft version, and then I just simply enable that and start passing out the new version. It's a habit kind of thing. It's like if you're maintaining your own Office Master, when do you put an update in? Maybe you can do it and make it a living document, and doing it as you do a job, you add something to your master. You can add a question to the checklist. It's the same kind of thing. So the whole process of creating a checklist is really not too difficult, and it's just getting in habits of things. The real process is getting people to truly use it, and for that you have to enter into some of the office politics with things. Here's the thing about cut sheets, where you're asked to provide these, highlight all the options and the elements. I talked about this because we now think this is very important, because all of the cut sheets we take and pass on to the construction administration. It may be the project architect that's going to do CA. It may be that's how you do CA in your own offices. It may not be. It may be you have a whole CA department and group. If they don't have anything, they have to start the whole thing all over by looking at the book and making assumptions and say, well, is Division 1 written like Division 1 for all our projects or not? So the cut sheets are very helpful. for over the whole life of the project. So turning it into a scheduling tool. This is a little more difficult. It creates itself sort of automatically once you really start to use it, because there's a time when you need to give it to someone to work on. There's a time when they need to give you that information back so that you get that information at the appropriate point to complete it, to complete your task on time. So if you set those times up, then you start to create a schedule that's independent of the project schedule, but relies upon it for their due dates. Their due dates of, if we're doing a permit set, which we're going to use as a draft or a review, then I've got a hard date for that. I've got to produce my book to be printed and distributed with their set of drawings that's going to go for that. So I back up and say, well, when do I need to have this interview for the checklist? When do I need to do that in order to complete? Because that's when I'm going to start from zero. I've got nothing down, and to me, the project doesn't exist until we sit down and have this interview. So then I back up a couple of weeks from that and I say, well, probably better put a reminder here. And then I probably ought to back up again and say, okay, now here's another one that says, come and get your checklist. Because people forget. And what we do is these are not just emails that are sent out to the sky and we hope they read them. They're actually put into the calendar system. So on the date that I've got it set for a reminder that says, you should be nearly completed with your checklist. This is the last date you should give me information to put in the headers so we can send sections, structural sections out to the structural engineer to mark up, send samples of page formats and layouts out to other consultants that are going to be providing documents so that it all looks the same. So these appear as a calendar reminders for them. And then even the meeting, it's a calendar reminder. So it starts to integrate with a whole bunch of other things besides just being this checklist that we all mark up and hand back and forth to each other. So for that, we have some instructions here. It's all part of, it's like right after that other set of instructions. So after you've completed editing this, there will be an interview. We're going to go over the checklist. At the end of the interview, it's handed back to you. I give them basically a couple of days. I say, okay, here's some other cut sheets that you need to fill in. Here's some information I've marked on here. It's like, yeah, we need waterproofing, but you don't know what kinds of waterproofing we need. Nobody bothered to look at the soils report yet. What did the soils report really say? So get the soils report out, look at it, and see what they recommend, and write me a little paragraph about what kind of waterproofing we need. Things of that kind of nature that are forgotten, that are missed. So they get a few days to clean that up and hand me the package back. So what happens here is that this starts to create these milestones internal to the checklist process and as a parallel track running with the project schedules and due dates. And this starts to look a little complex. And over here on the wall, so that people can see it afterwards, you can walk up there and see it. What we're going to see here is bits and pieces of this, is this whole process that I have. And it talks about time, it talks about cutoff dates, it talks about due dates for when things are due from consultants that something should arrive. And that it has the flow process, that something goes to the project architect, how they have to send it off to consultants, when they should be getting information back from the consultants. These all become dates. They actually become hard dates that are put on a calendar. So here's what the top of it looks like. On the left-hand side, we have the sun and the moon, and on the right-hand side, we have the mushroom. And the milestone markers. I've actually got a few additional kinds of milestones that I put into the system now, but this is basically what we've been working with for a long time. From the very beginning, everybody knows if they're a project architect, you get a project assigned to you, the first person you come see is me. The first person you come see is me. Because I need to generate all these schedules and I need to do it with all the other workflow going in the office. Because we don't just do one project at a time. I'm sure everybody else out here doesn't do just one project at a time. I'm doing, well, I guess I would say this past November through January was probably one of the most intense periods of times that we had, and I was turning out a permit review set or a final set every week. I had one going out at some point every week. Did I maintain that schedule? No. I couldn't quite keep up with that, and occasionally there were some times where we had to let something slip and had to move some projects around that were more sensitive than others, because that's really intense. There's only one of me. And now the other thing about, you're in the dark and the information goes one way and you never get any answers back, and the drawings show up and it's like, I expect something in 3 weeks, and it's like, 2 hands, 10 fingers. That's all I got. I can't give you any more. You can't work me 24 hours a day. I sort of have a expiration point where I will fall over. So, yeah, we can throw manpower for the drawings because we have staff. If you only have one specifier, or if you only have 2, or however many you have fixed, limited resources, and you can't do more than you can do. You can try to stay up all night, but it's not going to work on a constant basis. So these schedules get integrated with the other schedules and workflow in the office. But here you can see where we're talking about at the very top of it, the project architect comes, he picks up his checklist, and this is really early. I mean, he just got told, you're going to be doing this project, and here's our tentative schedule. And he comes and he gives me those dates, and I set them up on the calendar. I set up his milestones, and I enter it into the calendar for him. So then he gets that as an email that has all the milestones in it, and as calendar events that he can see that pop up for him. And if it changes, because all projects do change, there's delays, there's sometimes projects get cut short, they want to get moved up faster. Those things happen, and so these adjust. It's not set in cement. It's not me telling somebody, oh, you've got to have it here, or you're not going to get anything. No, it never works that way. But at the same time, it's a two-way street. You have to make it so that your scheduling works with your workload. So anyway, he comes, picks it up, he gets his schedule back. The schedule's created, I send it to them. And then he's told what he's going to have to send out to consultants. He goes and talks to the consultants. We do a thing where the structural engineers use our spec sections and mark it up because they're so coordinated. So he talks to the structural engineer, goes down the table of contents with him and says, what sections do you need? We set a header up on it for the job and send him the masters out so that that structural engineer is working with a set of documents that has the job name on it, so he knows what to send back to us, because we have structural engineers that are doing more than one project with us. So the packages go back and forth to consultants, and we end up with this, the checklist interview when everything comes in. All the markups from consultants come in. Due slightly after this are a set of other consultants' work that comes in that gets quickly reviewed and looked at for format and basic content, and I go through and find things in MEP like, they've really described a fire enunciator panel that's going to be in your main lobby, and it's got bug eye buttons on it and flip switches, and you just don't want that there. Maybe you better talk to them. Or, gee, it's a high-class hotel, but for some reason he just left in the default, and all your light switches are going to be white plastic with white plastic plates. Do you really want that? I mean, maybe you do. I don't know. It's like, there's a decision. But a lot of those items are missed, and so I use that as a habit to go through and pick it up, part of my checklist. And it says in the mechanical, electrical, plumbing sections of the checklist, which basically say only, these are going to be developed by the engineer. It says, I will be giving you a list, Mr. Project Architect, that will tell you certain items that you need to review their documents, or I'm going to call your attention to them. All the little aesthetic items that they're picking and putting into mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, I want to make sure someone on the architecture side has seen them and understands them for what they're saying they're going to be. Big thing is that wall plates and plug faces and switch handles are 99% of the time wrong. It's just life in the slow lane. So anyway, we go through the process of the checklist, and this is where now we've had the interview, which is a sit-down 2-hour interview approximately. I allow at least 2 hours for it. Some take a little less, some take a little longer. And then I hand it back to him. This is where he comes back with the completed markups and of the checklist. And I actually get to start work here. This is where I really start work. And basically, I'm 3 weeks from the draft, and I'm starting work on the project, ground zero. So this is all the information, goes back and forth. Consultants' originals coming in. I'm processing that information. I'm coordinating it all, and then we print the draft or make PDF files of it, and it goes back off to reviewers again. So that then starts another process. The final date for any project is always sort of like floating out there, and we know where it is, but it may not be real. And typically when a draft or a review set has gone in, and for its process here, it's that date may slip, and often does slip. The owners take an extra period of time to review something. Consultants fail to perform. Or, things just get busy otherwise in the office and decisions don't get made, and maybe the date creeps up on everybody, and so there's an extension for something, or they get permit comments in and something has to be redone. We had a university we were doing a project for, and we gave them the review draft, and it was, oh my goodness, we seem to have under-budgeted everything considerably. So the whole process had to go back through design to sort of like resize the building. So some significant things can happen there. So a whole new set of milestones come into play for the final. Now, has the checklist life ended? No, it's still there. Remember I said, here's where owners come to you and say, we want you to document the interior designer's work. Or I've had some initial VE responses from a contractor who wants us to entertain various different ways of doing things. And so these get marked up on the checklist if we're going to change something. Or decisions that just nobody knew, or that overhead door, it's become an overhead grill, by golly. And so, now we can go back in and fill out the part about the overhead grill and cross out the overhead door. And it's also marked up in the actual draft or review copy of the book. But it's something that becomes, more useful over time. So anyway, the reviewers have the draft, everything is supposedly good, we're all going along happy, and then we create this new schedule. Everything has gone back out to the consultants, we're going to confirm the final date, new page layouts get the actual final date in it. I always print out or send PDFs out of the draft that actually says draft instead of a date on it, so I don't date any document that's not official. Just my own personal habit, but it lets everybody know that if you come to a meeting and you've got a book that says draft on it, you're probably not well informed. So here are comments that come in from all different kinds of people. Consultants are reviewing their work, and you see down here complete doors and floors. Well, what this is that we do our own hardware. We don't use a consultant unless there's a very significant amount of security. Security on projects really make hardware nasty. So it's at this point where I get a set of drawings of the doors, floor plans, and the completed door schedule. And so that gets written in there. This is all done at the very end because the last thing you ever want to do, if you've ever done door hardware, is you just do not want to do that early and then get to change it. It's probably the hardest thing to revise than, I don't know, learning how to do this whole profession. So no, I hate to change doors, so I do them all at the very end. There's this process is coming up here, and what you're going to see at the top of the next one, I think that line is left in there. It basically says, at this point, what's it say at the top? I can't read it on my own. It says, yeah, 14 days to the final. This is that red bar. It's like that 14 days. That's when I get the door schedule and everything. So here, this red bar, these are all the last minute things that come in. Basically, it also says when we hit this point, I'm telling them, you know, you've known for a long time this red bar is coming on the chart here. This is a big milestone. This says right in front of it, one of the milestone markers, it says, this is the last day you can give me anything. And know it's going to go in. You can give me everything. You can give me the whole book markup and hand it to me on this day as a package, and it will make it in the book. But if you go after this date, I can't guarantee it. Now, I almost always manage to get everything in, but I don't want anybody to ever rely on that. And that's a very important part of any milestone, is letting people know what you can effectively do and when you need to have it to be able to effectively do it. So they're knowing that if they, you know, there are some things that can come in at the very end, and I can probably get them in, and maybe not. So that's this milestone process, this process of setting the checklist up so that through the whole life of the project, you know what you need, when you need it, and what it, and they know what they need to give you. They meaning the sun, the moon, and the stars, because they know everything. So now we come, here is the whole, you know, the last 10 days to the final, or the last 3 days to the final, where everything comes out at the end. It's like the consultant's list of drawings. We always get lists of drawings from people, and we have, I guess, the majority of our work, at some point, some bank or whatever, or a lending organization is looking at the list of documents, and if the list of drawings doesn't have it, word for word matching the title block, then they want it all changed. So we actually have to set eyes on the lists of on the title blocks from the consultants, because the lists that we get are often, I guess you would say, they're approximations. They're not the real title. So that's all stuff that's coming in at the very last minute. They know it, I know it. Everybody's understanding that there's some things that you're going to get in the last few hours before the project goes out the door. So it's talking about getting these things, compiling these things, determining quantities, who's getting what, how you're going to make your prints, or whether you're doing distribution electronically. But all of these things, this is all part of the process. If you don't know these times of how much it takes you to do it, you can't create the milestone to tell you when you need to start it, or when you need to tell people, you got to quit giving me stuff, because today I'm assembling your document. And if I don't start creating these PDFs, and if we're going to lock them and we're going to distribute them, I've got 4 hours, it's lunchtime now, we're supposed to send it out before 5 o'clock. If I don't start doing it now, then I'm not going to get it done. Which would you rather have? This 1 or 2 items that you've just handed me, where I have to write a new section for it, and we're going to delay the project one day because I physically can't get this done in this amount of time? Or do we want to make that addendum number 1? You know, it's like a lot of discussions. Everybody's wanting stuff stuck in at the last minute. So anyway, the whole project's ultimately put together. It goes out the door, and we're ready to do addendum number 1, because there's always addendum number 1, right? So that's the process. That's the whole thing. And I think that the checklist is something that really ties this all together. A lot of people don't believe me. And I've published this, and they look at it in a kind of amazement. So what I want to do now is I'm going to say, what kinds of questions or what kinds of comments or what do you think might be wrong with this process? Do you think it works for you? Is this the kind of thing that you do? Anybody? Yes?
Do you get your architects to stop designing?
Well, that's between the design group and the construction document group. And we have a pretty firm hand on that, but still, you can't really stop it. If the designer wants to interject himself back into it, the project architect has got to be able to tell him, and the principal in charge has to be able to tell somebody, hey, this is a process here that has to be stopped, or we're going to be, pushing things to the point. It's not me. I can't do that. I'm the specifier. I am not in charge of this project. I'm in charge only of producing this book that has to match the drawings. Now, if you're going to revise the drawings, it's like I can look at it and say, oh, you're just changing stone patterns. I don't care. Have fun, But if it's, oh, wow, it used to be tile, and now it's all stone, that's very different, So, but that is a dialogue that I cannot insert myself in. That's a dialogue where somebody's coming to me, at this last crucial time, the last 10 days or the last 3 days, and saying, whoa, ho, the lobby changed from tile to stone. And it's like, well, let me see. Where are we in the process? I've got some blank time. Can I get that in? And I let them know, can I get that in? Or is it going to be kind of rough? But that's really a dialogue that has to happen at some other level. It's not part of the specifier. Yes, again?
When that happens, and they go from a 4-inch by 4-inch tile to
big format tile or a stone floor, yeah.
And now all of a sudden you need to, do you take it upon yourself to say, okay, Mr. Architect, do you realize you now have to have a slab depression? Got to change your structure? Well,
if I detect that they haven't done that kind of thing, but typically what it is that we have I guess you would say that we're very construction document oriented, and our project architects and project managers are going to really pick that up right away. And typically our designers are not going to miss needing a slab depression. Plus we also tend to work in the new world of post-tension slabs, and no one really wants to ever depress those little suckers anyway. Yes?
Send them out in Word or get them back in Word, or always PDF?
I send everything out in PDF files, and I typically, it's like just because I went and talked to the principals about it, but we also lock them. No one has ever complained. Every now and then I get complaints back from a printer who says, you need to unlock your files so I can put the blank pages in. And I said, well, open them up and look at them. They're already there. So when it's printed two-sided, in fact, I even put, just as a little trivia thing here, the file names actually have the printing instructions in it. It says Division 1, gray, 2 sides. That's the file name. Yeah.
How do you scale this for smaller projects, say projects that 6 weeks or less are doing?
Exactly the same way you would scale. It's like the project, the checklist is going to come in when we sit down, or even when he shows up and says, I need a checklist. And we have these all the time, because we have a lot of owners that maintain their buildings, and people move out and they say, well, we're going to renovate the upper level lobbies and the main floor entrance area. Okay. And the scope of the project is very limited materials, and the duration is like, yeah, we're still going to do a review, and it may only be internally because that review document is very beneficial. So the project is like a total of 6 weeks long, maybe, from when he shows up at my desk to when it's going to be finished and out the door. And I just mark different ones in there. Some different things might get compressed into the same thing. The part where they're talking to consultants about their work. It may be that the consultants, we don't need to have a lot of interaction with them. So sometimes the MEP guys come back and say, oh, we're just going to do it all in the drawings because it's so small. We have hardly any work involved with it. Or structural says, no, I don't need this. It's all existing structure. We're going to poke a few holes in the slab, and I can cover that with my structural drawing notes. So, okay, that's the dialogue, and that's happened. That whole preamble is done. So, yeah, you just compress the dates, and over here he's like severely marking it up. He's not just like putting question marks on it. It's like kill it with a magic marker. So cross out those sections if you don't have them. Yes?
What about your Division 0 procurement requirements and things that they may need to go back to the owner for?
We actually have a document that's broken out even more. Yes, we have the checklist, and all the questions that need to be answered are in the checklist that the project architect gets. But what I sat down and did early on as well with the project architects was, what kind of dialogues do you have with your owner, and when do you have them? And so we created a whole separate little document that's called the owner's checklist. And it goes to him and says, it's everything from, are you using AIA's general conditions, or are you writing your own custom ones? Will we get to see them? Or do you want us to write them, print them, coordinate them, or are you going to distribute them yourselves? All of that's in there, all the things about temporary facilities, everything that you would put in Division 0, and all that stuff that's owner information that's in Division 1 is all in a separate document. It's called an owner's checklist. And what I tell the project architects, because they need to know and understand the information, is that, no, they don't just get that back from them and hand it to me. Now, they get that back from the owner, and they fill out those same questions on the master checklist. So it gets recorded in one place. Yes?
How does your office do outline specs, or do you even do them?
Yes, we do outline specs. We do them for schematic and for design development. Typically, mostly schematic. And I guess mine is a very kind of a different process. It kind of has its heritage from what I was doing back in my very first years of the late 70s and early 80s. It's like little thumbnail descriptions of the work. I still use the master format organization as opposed to uniformat. A lot of people have moved over to uniformat, but I don't do that. I have a little thing that tends to describe in general what's happening for the whole division, and then highlights that are 50 words, 3 lines or less about tile, unless I need to go on and on about tile. Just the basic things. And usually an outline that's just the architectural and structural part of it will condense itself down to be about 15 pages.
Yeah, I was curious because I use an outline spec the same way you use a checklist. It's just a different way.
Exactly. And what we've got here is that the project architect has received the checklist as well. And I say, okay, if we're going to do an outline spec, use the outline spec, and you, because we have a master outline spec that has all the stuff in it, and they go through and cross it out and hand that back to me. And I say, okay, now that's recorded good information, but the checklist itself is one step past that. The checklist is asking stuff that's never going to show up in an outline spec at all. And so they use the outline spec to assist them to write the checklist.
You're working together now.
Yes.
The architect does the filling out.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's his tool primarily to communicate to me. I created the tool for their use. Well, I created the tool so that I could figure out what they were doing, but it's like it's their tool for their use. Yes.
You said you are churning out a spec about once a week.
Well, that was that November, December, January, yeah.
Did you get a chance to look at the project drawings?
Yes. I sit down at the interview. This is an interesting thing, too, is that I have, I would say, since about 1983, when I came with this company that I'm with now, WDG, and I've written for them, and I've had a couple of assistants over time, but I've always been, for all that time, the senior specifications writer. I would say the only time that I look at drawings is at the checklist interview. I don't want a set of drawings from people because that is a handicap for them. They use it to handicap themselves. They provide me the drawings, and it's like, well, it's in the drawings. Well, no, I want you to be able to tell me through that checklist the things I need to write. If I look at something and it looks a little suspicious, or we're looking at the drawings during the interview and it looks a little strange, then I'm going to start to dig a little deeper. And it's like I talk about, I didn't go over it, I missed kind of a little step in the checklist interview process. The checklist also contains a lot of leading questions. I mean, I could go on and on about hollow metal doors, right? But when it says, do you have exterior doors? There's a whole number of questions that I'm going to ask him if he answers yes. I mean, that was just an example. I mean, that particular item is not going to generate a lot. But there are, like on waterproofing, when he says, oh yeah, I have blindside waterproofing, that's all I've asked him. But that leads me to say in the interview, I say, well, let's look at the plans here. Where are we? What areas are we doing? Where's the soils report? Let's talk about it. So we go into detail. And yeah, I do get involved in details with things. I tend to look at small parts of big issues. So roofing details and edges and things of that nature. Yes? And
have you worked this process with a lean team or a team that's practicing lean delivery methods and full planning as opposed to your direct process?
We have our own way of doing things in our office, and I would say it's kind of a hybrid way, and occasionally we've tried some different ways. Everybody has still come back to say they really like collecting the information through the checklist process that we've got. We've had a lot of people where we've hired, very experienced project architects and a couple of project managers. That doesn't tend to work out well, but some very experienced people that have come in from outside and have no experience of working with this system like this at all. And typically, it may be a little bit hard-pressed at first, but typically they say, well, it's a great way to collect information and a great way to keep it alive over the life of the project. Yes, sir?
How do you incorporate lessons learned from executed projects?
Well, that's exactly what it is. Like the whole CA process is a lesson learned process for us. Because what we do is we take it around and say, okay, and I always have a soft spot in my heart for all the independents because many of the independent specifiers don't have this feedback of a project that gets completed. You deliver the project manual to the architect, adios. Maybe an addendum or two, I mean, that may be about it. You may never know what happened to that project. We take our projects through the whole process, and I get to see, here's the CA guy coming along and saying, well, they've sent this in and they say they can't find this material. Well, sometimes I know that's not true, and sometimes it turns out to, well, wow, the manufacturer, he was bought by somebody else and they renamed the entire line. Products may be exactly the same, but you can't find them anymore because it's like the information's gotten scrambled in the industry. So yeah, I mean, that comes back, first it comes back to me because the CA people, if they can't find something, they're told, just come see me. Walk into my office, sit down, say, hey, we're looking at this and I have no idea what they're trying to send me this or why. I mean, you've got 9 paint manufacturers here and they've come along and given me number 10, it's like, why? So, we go over these kinds of things, and if it's something that's relevant, then I turn it back in. And sometimes it's the information that's like, go tell the project architects, like, go sit in on the project architects meeting they're going to have once a week or once a month, and tell them, here's some things that were showing up in CA. So we have this feedback constantly going back to the top of the food chain so that it goes all the way through the whole thing. I have sympathy for the independents and how they maintain some products. It's like, it's hard enough for me, and I get constant feedback.
What do you use for tracking time or for schedule? Do you put stuff into any kind of scheduling program or?
Well, we have our project architect, our project managers actually control the time. And they do estimates, and we do billings, and we have our time card is based upon your project, what you're billing your project to. Yeah, and that information, every one of my projects they can look at, they can bring up any given project, or they can look at, my time, CA phase, all projects combined, what's the average time for a particular, for all jobs, what's the average time for this particular owner, because we have some owners that have certain peculiarities, so they can go and look at my time or any of the other time. They can look at typical project architect's time and break that down, but the project managers put together the scheduling tool for that. So, it's based upon our time card input.
But if you're juggling 5 or 6 projects at once, are you looking, then going into the PM software to look at?
No, I'm not. I'm basically, I guess you would just say, it's happening. Yeah, there's not everything we can schedule and do, and I think sometimes you can get involved in that, and it's like, did this save me anything, or did I spend more time doing this scheduling process than I'm saving by not bothering to do it? That's a project management tool, and they do that, and they can analyze looking backwards. And so when the project architect comes to me for his checklist, I'm also talking to them about what kind of scope are we doing here, and then if something seems a little fishy, like, oh, wow, we're working in an existing building and we're going to retain the facade and nothing else. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a little bit severe. So I'll go back to the project manager and say, what are you putting in down here for time? What are we, it's going to be a little more complex, have a little more, or do you have a specialized consultant that's going to work on this, or are we going to do it ourselves? That kind of thing. So yeah, it gets put in there, but it really relies upon, it comes in to me to look at it and say, yeah, there's some complex points here. Maybe we need to add or understand we need to make a little more time for this project. I don't add any more time to the schedule because I can't. I got a fixed due date. I got to meet that date. But I know how it has to flow with the other workload in the office. Anything else? Other questions? Yes?
One master spec checklist, or do you have several by project?
One master specification checklist.
So like a healthcare project would be completely different than a.
Right. Absolutely. No, it just is like, here's the question, is it hollow metal doors or hollow metal doors? If you look at, the whole concept of the project itself is very different. Division 1 is going to be really different. Division 0 is going to be very different. But any individual item still has the same kind of questions. It's just like, are you going to put, hospital hinges with the angled bevels on them on the hardware or not? It's like, that's just a question that's there. Yes?
Do you have specification standards in-house and are they reflected in your checklist?
Yes. We use, the firm has existed since the 30s. So there's many things that they've done over time, just office practice. Every office has different practice. I came in '83. And so I've been with them for a long time as well. It's like, I don't know, 30 years, close to that. So anyway, we turned it into quality control items, meaning that what gets put into it is not, this is the only way we're going to do it, but this is the way we would like to do this. And if something comes up and it's different, then it serves to raise some red flags to say, oh, we have 3 or 4 different roofing systems that we like and will use, and we have a couple that if they really twist our arms, we'll do maybe, and then we have some that we will like run away from, you know. And so there, it's like, if it's not there, there's a reason why it's not there. Is I don't go out and say, well, what's in AI master spec? It's like, I'm not going to touch some roofing systems ever. We just won't do that. But that's all the way from there to little things like, we changed our mind recently, but there was a problem, and somebody got sued from slipping on polished stone. There were, for a while, it was like, we don't do anything but honed stone. Now, we've changed that. But for a long time, I guess probably until somewhere when I came with the firm through maybe the early 90s, we just as an office just would not do polished stone on the floor. And that was all before all of the ADA slip resistance requirements which kind of made it moot, but yes.
One more.
Sure.
How much, if at all, you let project teams use you as a research resource for specific specification questions on their projects?
Absolutely 100% of the time. They can walk in my office anytime they want, sit down and talk to me about anything, and I'll go off and find stuff for them. I mean, we get this, that's one of the things that we try to do, is that just so the designers understand what they're working with. I'll get a question from a designer that will come into my office and say, I'm looking for something that can do this. I'd really like to do this with it. Or I saw something somewhere and I have no idea what it is because I was seeing it from 2 miles away, or a photograph or something. How did they do that? You know, what's there? And so, you know, if they can't find it or figure it out, then I'll try to find it and figure it out. Maybe I'll find the manufacturer that supplied the material that became used on this facade, and I'll just say, what'd you guys do there? What's different from what you normally do, because it looks really different. So. Anything else? We're kind of like, that's the time. Hope this has benefited. Over here, feel free to wander over here and take a look at the whole chart. It's on the wall.